in a safe place. It's a remarkable story, as you mentioned, of really the heights of scientific achievement, and in regards to Rife, really the depths for an individual.
Well, let me just shut up for a little bit and let you tell us the story of the development of the 5 microscopes and what happened to them. If you want to, you have the floor.
Just Steve. Jump right in there.
Jump in there and go.
As I had mentioned, Rife had the support of 2 really influential individuals with a lot of money, Timken and a man named Bridges of Bridges Carriage Company. They provided Royal Rife with all of the money and all of the scientific equipment that he wanted. He proceeded to feel that the microscopes of the day really weren't utilizing principles that would be beneficial for scientific research. And he, in his own laboratory, built a sequence of 5 microscopes. The first microscope achieved 17,000 magnification. The Universal, which was number 3, achieved 50,000, and the other 3 were developed for various functions. Now, the remarkable thing about this achievement is that not only was he able to achieve very high magnification with clarity, but a very, very remarkable thing happened when he peered through the microscope. He was able to stain the various organisms using frequencies. In other words, as he peered through the microscope, utilizing the principles of the scope, the various viruses would illuminate in their own natural color. Now, so we don't lose a lot of your viewers, we're not going to go into the highly physics or the technical aspect, and we'll try to keep it simplistic, but the idea is that, as an example...
I got a bright bunch out there.
Okay.
Yeah, they can stay with you right here.
The virus of cancer was always a purplish red. The virus of typhoid was always a turquoise blue. And 60 various diseases, the viruses that really were prevalent in that diseases would illuminate in a color. Now, why this is very, very intriguing is, once you know the color, you can determine the frequency. That is what color is. And he then was able to discover, as you mentioned earlier, the mortal oscillatory rate or death frequency of those viruses based on the colors that they would give off. Now, the principle he used was basically heterodyning light.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would take a substance that would normally not have illuminated a color, and it would illuminate. Now, he also had a very strong technical group behind him, including Dr. Lee DeForest, who is regarded as the father of modern radio tubes,
yes,
who built a frequency generator. And it was said of Royal Rife that he would spend anywhere from 36 to 48 hours almost straight peering through his microscope at the slide with the color, turning a frequency dial very, very slowly. And when he hit the correct frequency, the color would immediately extinguish from the slide, or really through his viewing microscope.
Because he was looking at a living organism.
Absolutely. Instead of the often dead organisms you would look at through the electron microscope.
Mm-hmm.
But really, in the simplistic way, once that color, or as soon as that color was extinguished, that was the mortal oscillatory frequency of that microorganism. There was a different frequency, not only for each different virus, but he, and you asked me earlier what the problem was, he unfortunately ended up at a time when there was a tremendous battle going on between the camps of Pasteur and Beauchamp, which had continued for many years. That is the feeling that microorganisms within the body mutate. It is not just one organism all the time. That even the cancer virus mutates during different stages of its development. And this is what he verified 100% through his microscope. So a frequency for cancer would only work at that cancer at a particular state, but he discovered the frequencies at other stages even of the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So you really, as I mentioned, have 2 incredible processes going on. One was the building of an incredible microscope, but number 2, the frequency devices which were also later to really, we feel, be the crux of his problem. You might say, well, what is the big threat of a microscope? Really, there is no threat of a microscope. The threat was a technique that eliminated diseases by frequency rather than by chemical.
And who was that threatening to? Certainly not the people.
No.
Not the patients.
No.
Not the ones with cancer.
No, you would have to look at, again, the pharmaceutical industry of the day. However, even in our records, we do not have direct evidence that this particular person was responsible. However, you would have to say, as an example, there were over 100 newspaper articles talking about the microscope in the 30s and 40s. There were articles in the Smithsonian Institute of the U.S. government. There were articles in the Franklin Institute, Scientific America. Today, if you go through the computer, you find no references that Royal Rife ever existed. You find no references that the microscope ever existed. And just in our local area, with the advantage of UCLA's library and University of Northridge, with over 350 books on microscopes, there is not one sentence, not one word of Royal Raymond Rife or the universal microscope. Now, one thing we have not really stated so far in the show is who was utilizing the microscope. We had E.C. Rosenau of the Mayo Clinic, who even today is considered one of the greatest researchers in the history of the Mayo. We had Arthur Kendall of Northwestern University. We had Milbank Johnson, locally of the AMA, which is very interesting. He was one of Rife's biggest supporters. We had Carl Meyer, who was regarded as one of the best biologists in the United States. All of these individuals used the microscope, and the poliomyelitis virus was seen at the Mayo Clinic by Rosenau. Now, with all of that as a background, it becomes even more remarkable that not one line appears in any book about the microscope.
And those men all wrote papers.
Absolutely.
And they wrote books.
Right.
They were great researchers.
Right.
They utilized this incredible instrument. They saw the poliomyelitis virus with it, probably with the universal microscope, which is the only one left. And thank goodness it's in your hands. And not a word. Did they know of the electronic way of getting rid of the viruses?
All of the doctors were quite aware. In fact, at first, these researchers were very interested in discovering the cause and nature of diseases. After they were able to demonstrate that a lot of these were viruses, in fact, to really keynote exactly what you're saying, Rife not only saw the virus of cancer, he had photographed it in 1934, and it wasn't until a few years ago that they finally admitted there was even a virus for cancer. All these individuals did write at first. E.C. Rosenau in the internal staff meetings of the Mayo Clinic wrote that due to this microscope, they were able to see forms of tuberculosis and typhus that they had never been able to see before. So they were writing at the beginning. When the frequency device was started to be utilized, this is when there seemed to be a clampdown. In fact, there was an article that appeared in the San Diego Tribune, Disease Organisms Destroyed, Claim of San Diego Scientist. It seems that once that particular article came out, that everyone else really quieted down. There was not too much talk. Even E.C. Rosenau never spoke about the Rife microscope again until his deathbed. And basically the thing that he said at the end was that the Rife microscope was legitimate.
Well, we know it's legitimate.
Definitely.
And we know these things were done. We have photographic evidence of that. There's a great deal of documentation to support not only the legitimacy of the microscope,